Hi again everyone, my name's Steve and this is Little Plastic People. In this video we're going to be looking at painting some green armour. Now, you're more than welcome to follow along, but please don't treat this as some kind of strict recipe. It's going to be a bit more of an experiment. I'm going to be swapping and changing and testing things throughout, which is very much in line with the way that I paint in general, as I do tend to have a goal in mind and maybe some colours and techniques that I plan to use, but honestly, I tend to wing my way there. But with that said, I'm going to try and edit things down so that you get the most snappy and important pieces of information. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the video. Let's go! Although not exclusively, I will be using an airbrush a lot during this painting session. This really helps speed things along and can be used to imply some simple lighting without a lot of effort. But before I start blasting away, I've stretched out an old tea towel over the work area just to catch some of the overspray. Although I do have a spray booth, this only tends to come out when I'm applying a lot of paint in one go, like base coating a vehicle or an army. You should of course always protect yourself from breathing in nasty particles, so mask up or use a booth if you prefer. With that said, you can see here that I'm having to give the airbrush a little clean and a backflow before we get started, as I clearly didn't do a good enough job of cleaning it last time. Now onto the base coating. I'm using a black primer from Vallejo here, which I find goes through my airbrush without too much trouble and gives a nice smooth, clean, solid place to start from. You can of course brush it on or use a suitable rattle can if you prefer. Once the primer is dry, I move on to a nice rich green from Vallejo's game colour range, specifically Sick Green. I combine this with a little water and mix it up in the cup with a pipette, like some kind of heathen animal. This works fine for me, and I've been doing it for ages, but you may want to mix your paints before they go into the brush, just to ensure no clogs. I now apply the Sick Green in a zenithal fashion, basically at a steep angle, directly from above. This will leave some of the areas directly underneath the sculpted detail darker than the rest, creating some believable shadows. Next up, a visual representation of my thought process. Here you can see I'm eyeing up some other greens before deciding where to go next. Looks like I've decided on grass green from AK. I'm a big fan of AK paints at the moment, particularly their 3rd gen. So if anyone from AK ever sees this, hint hint, nudge nudge. After a good mix with a little water directly in the cup again, I consider spraying the armour from top down, but decide on sponging instead. This is just to add a little extra texture. So I break out a tile palette and start attacking the panel with an old piece of sponge and the grass green, focusing more towards the top and not being too precious about the application. Now it's back to the grass green that we already have mixed up in the airbrush and it's ready to go. I apply this as previously planned, directly from the top down in a couple of light passes, just to smooth out the previous sponging. Right, now it's time to bump up that vibrancy with a little laser green, again from AK. Just like before, I consider how to apply it and pick the sponge again. This time a little more thought goes into its application, but I still focus towards the top of the panel, leaving a nice dark transition towards the bottom. Again, I decide to smooth this out with a little spray of the laser green through the airbrush, but very much focusing on the top edges and at a very steep angle. This ensures we're only hitting the tops of the sculpted detail and retaining that transition. Quick blast with the wife's hairdryer and we're good to move on to the next stage. Now I wasn't too sure about this stage if I'm honest. Applying white even if very lightly with a sponge does run the risk of desaturating the piece, which is totally fine if that's what you're going for, but this is why I often avoid painting straight black or white, as these are both the absence of colour, and therefore, in my mind at least, the absence of interest. But as we'll be bringing the whole piece together with a coat of Pox Walker Shade from GW thinned down with a little flow improver, just to help it get into the recesses, this should be okay. Now, you could leave things here and go about your day knowing you've painted an interesting piece of armour ready for the tabletop. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and make things a little more interesting. It's time to add a little more depth and detail. So out comes my trusty purple ink mix. This is a mix that I've been adapting and topping up for years now, so its recipe has been lost to the sands of time, I'm afraid, but you could substitute it for something like Magos or Luxion Purple from GW's contrast range, as they are pretty similar, but they may need thinning down. With that said, if you're interested in experimenting with inks, I'd highly recommend the Muted range from Liquitex and some Flow Improver from Vallejo just to get you started. Just keep in mind that even the best artist inks do have the tendency to reactivate or tear, so be careful using a brush over them or seal them in with a little varnish. Anyways, I apply the ink nadally, which basically is the direct opposite to zenithal. So, from the bottom up. This adds some richness and further interest to the shadows while maintaining the bright green that we've worked so hard to develop. Now that we've got the main colours down, I'm starting to think about weathering, so it's about time to introduce a save point. Applying a coat of gloss varnish will help preserve the colours underneath and assist with getting any weathering right into the deep detail. It'll also give us the opportunity to undo any mistakes without damaging our previous work. But it's important to make sure the varnish is fully dry before slapping anything over it, as it can reactivate and really ruin your day. Now the varnish is dry, we can think about the colours we're going to use for the weathering. Since the piece is green, I'll be looking for oranges, reds and warm browns. These all sit directly opposite green on the colour wheel and should make for a nice contrast. And so, I initially decide on Garagax sewer. Wouldn't it be nice if someone could do a pronunciation guide for all of the GW trademark names? But before getting any of the unpronounceable sewer concoction on my brush, I switch to another GW contrast paint, which is easier to pronounce, Skeleton Horde. I start applying this straight from the pot after giving it one hell of a shake, but soon start to thin it down directly on the model with a little water from my pot, pushing it into the recesses and away from the flat areas, focusing on the lower details until I'm happy with the result. After another blast with a hairdryer, I grab some light rust wash from Vallejo and start applying it into the deepest and lowest recesses. I'm trying to imagine where the most water, dust and grime would collect and run. To represent where water, oil and other fluids may pool and pull the grime down the panel, I simply drag the tip of a fine brush down from these areas, making sure to keep the lines nice and thin. I find less is more with weathering. Several thin passes help build up believable weathering, where a single thicker application can be a bit too much of a stark contrast. But you do you. Right, we're almost there, but I feel that there's still something missing in the shadows. So I grabbed some Luxion Purple Contrast from GW and use this through the airbrush to tone down the rust in the shadows and add a little more colour interest. Finally, it's time to finish with some matte varnish. I've tested out quite a few now and I found that AK's Ultra Matte works really nicely through an airbrush. So, on it goes. And after a final blast with the wife's hairdryer, there we have it. Green armour fit for your infantry, vehicles, terrain and anything else that you'd like to paint green. This same principle can be applied to many colours. Here you can see I've got yellow, red, green and white. But you can pick anything. Well, that's it guys. I hope you found this interesting and maybe even a little entertaining. If you have enjoyed this style of video, please do let me know. I've enjoyed it very much and would like to make it a regular edition. But as with any videos that you're going to find on this channel, please don't take this as being prescriptive. It's very much a how you could rather than a how you should. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please do like, share, comment and all that good stuff. It really helps. Anyway, until next time, bye!